Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to start a new video series where I talk about book adaptations. Book versus the movie. What changed? What's different? What's better? And what's worse? And today we have, I think, the pinnacle of the latter, and that is The Hobbit. Today we're going to be talking about The Hobbit. So before we get into the video, hi, I'm Blake, and if you're new to my channel, hello, welcome. Please subscribe for more bookish content and other videos like this. And also don't forget to follow my socials because, yeah, I don't know, I'm greedy. So The Hobbit. Should this have been made? No. And just talking about the film trilogy, first you have to look back at the Lord of the Rings adaptation, the movie trilogy that changed everything. And full disclosure, Lord of the Rings as a trilogy, the films, are probably my favorite films of all time. They just work on every level, I believe, and they're just phenomenal, and I have watched them so many times. Also, controversial opinion, I think that the theatrical cut is better than the extended editions. The extended editions are nice, but the theatrical versions are paced better. Before we get into talking about the Hobbit movies, we have to talk about the book, because the book is perfect. Like, I remember reading this book when I was a kid, and there's something so whimsical and magical about The Hobbit and the story that The Hobbit tries to tell, or I think it succeeds in telling. We have Bilbo, and you have these this company of 13 dwarves and Gandalf, and they're trying to, like, just get rid of this dragon and take back their treasure. It's a very simple storyline. And it would be very hard to mess that up, don't you think? Well, and The Hobbit at its core is a very condensed story, or it's a very contained story. There isn't a lot of fat. It's very episodic too. Bilbo and the dwarves kind of go from one area to the next, to the next, to the next. And it was funny because actually this past fall I read the entirety of The Hobbit aloud to one of the kids that I babysit, and he just loved it. And it was very easy for him to keep track of what was happening, because like every adventure was kind of like its own chapter. So it kept him engaged. It was very short. It was compelling. And I think the writing that J.R.R. Tolkien did for that series, or for that book, is phenomenal. It's so well done. And there's something just so magical about reading his prose as well, because it very much feels like it was meant to be read aloud. Like it's got a very childlike feel, like it's full of wonder, and it's a very, like, even though, like, you know, spoiler alert for The Hobbit, if you have somehow been under a rock and not read the book or seen the trilogy, I'm gonna be spoiling the shit out of it. So, but yeah, so like in the book, like Thorin dies, like a couple of the dwarves die, I think, but it's not, it's like a moment of like slight heaviness in the book, but it's not something like super dark and dramatic. It's very, like, you know, in a kid's book when somebody dies or passes away, or like their death is kind of dealt with as in a very kind of like it's sad, but then the story keeps going. Because, you know, you don't want to deal with like intense grief and trauma in a children's book, because that's what this is. The Hobbit is a children's book. And the movies completely fucking forgot that. And so just talking about the movies, I think we have to talk about the really insane production behind it, because originally this was supposed to be a 2-film series directed by Guillermo del Toro. Guillermo del Toro is amazing. I love him so much, and he poured his heart and his soul into crafting these Hobbit movies because they were something that he'd been wanting to do for a really long time. And because of creative differences, him and the studio parted ways, and the studio then turned to Peter Jackson to step back in as director, take over full creative force, and then they decided to stretch the 2 movies into 3, so we would have a brand new epic trilogy, very much like The Lord of the Rings. And he barely had any pre-production time. Like, he was still working on like things of the script while they were filming. And that all comes together in an end product that very much makes sense as to how hurried the production was. Because in the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, they filmed the entire trilogy before they released them. Like, they had time to really work on them and just get them to the point, you know, that they are now. Like, they're amazing, beautiful films. And so the opposite happened with The Hobbit, and it really shows. So we're gonna talk about each of the 3 movies, because I think they're all so different, which is weird. Like, they don't really feel cohesive at all. Whereas Lord of the Rings, I think, it's a very cohesive trilogy. Like, it very much feels like a continuation of a story. The Hobbit trilogy is a complete mess. It's really bad. But the first movie is really good. An Unexpected Journey is the first Hobbit movie, and I actually just recently rewatched all 3 of them for this review, and I actually watched the extended versions because I hadn't seen the films since they came out in theaters years and years and years ago, and I just had a very bad taste in my mouth from watching them. And so I was gonna go back in and hope that the extended editions would fix some of the problems that I had with the original movies. And honestly, the extended version of An Unexpected Journey did exactly what I hoped it would do for like the whole trilogy. I feel like the small portions that they added back into the story just really flowed a lot better. You were able to get some more character moments between like Bilbo and Thorin, and so there was just, I don't know. I think the first Hobbit movie is the closest Peter Jackson came to replicating the magic of the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, and it actually, like, watching the first movie made me really excited to finish rewatching the trilogy, just because I found myself enjoying it really, like, a lot. There was a lot of really great moments in the first movie that were pulled directly from the book. We have Bilbo and the Trolls, which is done fantastically. You have the first meeting when the dwarves come in, and of course you have that epic song. And it's the first movie, I think, really captured the kind of wonder and childlike magic that the book goes out of its way to capture so well. And that's why I really found myself really into this first movie. And so, with all that being said, there are some small detractors. I do think that, at the time, I hated the CGI in the original, and with this 4K kind of re-release, they actually updated some of the CGI, and also the frame rate on the original theatrical release was really weird, made it feel like a video game, and so for this new re-release, they scaled it back and made it feel more like an actual movie again. So I think just those kind of visual factors enhanced me enjoying it because it felt more reminiscent of Lord of the Rings. And yeah, the only issue that would then cause problems later in the trilogy is the character of Azog. He is the orc who he's mentioned in the book, but in the trilogy he's kind of put in as this pursuing force, this these orcs that won't stop hounding and pursuing the dwarves and Bilbo, because it was very much meant to be just kind of in the book they just kind of go from place to place to place, but in the films they're being actively pursued, so there is a more sense of danger throughout. And so while I did appreciate that, Azog just honestly, like, he looks good at times, but then other times he just looks really bad. He is a fully CGI orc. I don't know why they could have just, like, put a dude in makeup. I mean, like, you know, you understand why Gollum has to be CGI, because he doesn't really resemble, like, a human. Like, it'd be really hard to just make a human look like that. Whereas, like, with orcs, they're just big guys with teeth. It would have been really easy to do practical makeup. And the thing that sucks is, like, there are orcs in these movies that have practical makeup, but then with the one who has the most screen time, he's just CGI and looks, like, very rubbery. So that's, like, very disappointing. And that's only really, like, the only thing I would have to say about the first movie that starts to not be enjoyable. However, this movie, the first movie, contains the best scene in the whole trilogy, which is the scene where Bilbo meets Gollum. That scene is so well done. It perfectly captures the kind of, like, dark, whimsical nature of that chapter from the book. Both Martin Freeman and Andy Serkis act their asses off in that scene. And yeah, just definitely the most enjoyable just moment in the whole trilogy. And even the stuff, like, with the Goblin King and even the weird stone giants, like, I think there's a lot to love about this first movie, as, like, you know, I can recognize its flaws, but also I think it's just really cool. I really enjoyed this movie. But then we get to the next one. So it's interesting because I actually remembered liking The Desolation of Smaug. But no. And so the first movie I would rate an 8 out of 10. For The Desolation of Smaug, it's getting a 6 out of 10. There were definitely some enjoyable moments that I feel were good. However, this is when a lot of the kind of, like, new elements start to creep in, and you can feel the bloat, because most of the first movie was just basically pulled straight from the pages, with the exception of Azog. But even he was just kind of like a slight addition. Like, he didn't really change a whole lot. Whereas in this movie, you can just tell they are trying so hard to appeal to fans of Lord of the Rings. And I am a huge fan of Lord of the Rings. However, just the unnecessary, like, connection, or, like, trying to connect this trilogy back to the original felt really out of place, because The Hobbit is a story that has, you know, the ring in it, and there's, like, a mention of Sauron, but that's not what the story is about. It's really not. And it's not until The Lord of the Rings that Bilbo's encounter with Gollum and, like, him having the ring starts to be, like, have a lot more weight, because there's, you know, crazy stuff happening. But at the time of the Hobbit trilogy, it doesn't really matter. And so just the way they tried to force those kind of connections felt really, really off. I think the biggest kind of indicator of that is Legolas. And as much as I love Orlando Bloom, he did not need to be here. He really did not need to be here. Because here's the thing. Legolas has an arc in Lord of the Rings. He has an arc, and it's really well done. And it's very good. Now, you take a prequel to that story, and he's a character who doesn't change. He's very static, and they did not give him a character arc because they couldn't have him not be in the same place he needed to be at the start of Lord of the Rings. And at the start of Lord of the Rings, he does not like dwarves. And then over the course of Lord of the Rings, he learns to be friends with the dwarf. Whereas in The Hobbit, his whole thing is that he hates dwarfs, and that's it. That's his character, and he's kind of, like, bitchy and wants to, like, have a relationship with Tauriel. And Tauriel, I'll get into in a bit. But it just, like, Legolas also feels very out of, like, it just feels like they're trying to shift the focus from Bilbo and like, into, like, Legolas and even Gandalf's subplot with the Necromancer. It just felt very, like it was shifting away from Bilbo and what made the first movie so enjoyable is because it was about the Hobbit. It was like an adaptation of the Hobbit. And now we get into like a weird pseudo trying to be Lord of the Rings. And I did not appreciate that. So I think the first big moment that like I noticed in this movie that started to like shift a lot from the book was actually in Mirkwood Forest. And like it's a cool sequence with spiders and things like that, but like just having recently reread the book, it made the changes even more impactful, because in the book we have you know, the whole gang, and they choose to leave the path because they see like elves feasting, and so like when Bilbo goes up in the trees, he like just sees endless forest basically, and so they are convinced that there's no way out, even though there had just been a ridge and they were almost out of the forest. And so that causes them, you know, they're very hungry, they think that, you know, they're never gonna get out. That's what causes them to leave the path. This moment in the movie honestly doesn't make sense, because Bilbo goes up and he's like, oh, there's Lake Town, and then he comes back down and then there's spiders. Whereas we have this whole sequence with the elves in the book, which is very kind of like mystical and ups the kind of tension of like the wood elves of the region. Like it feels very much like this is their forest. And so it's just like a really cool sequence, because they're like running and chasing, and then like everything goes dark, and that's how they get lost, and that's how they get captured by the spiders. And so even just a small tweak like that, I was starting to be like, okay. And so then when we get to the actual, like the elves of the, like the forest, we have Lee Pace's Thranduil, and honestly, the best character in this movie trilogy. His acting was so great. Like he just gives off this like haughty, regal attitude. And I loved every time he was on screen, because I was just like, I want more of this like bitchy elf king. Please give me more of him. But even then, and then, you know, we have even more book differences, which, because also, I just want to say, like, the spiders in the book were just spiders. Like, they were not Sauron's evil servants. And so, like, in the movie, it feels very much like the forest belongs to Sauron and the evil. And it's like, no, it's just like you stray from the path in the book. Like, there are consequences. Like, you didn't listen. It feels very, like, kind of fable-y, you know, like, you know, one of the old fairy tales where it's like, if you leave the path, bad things are gonna happen. And so, like, that's what happens in the book. And I love that kind of, like, fairy tale aspect to it. Whereas, you know, in the movie, it doesn't even feel like the wood elves, like, own the forest. Like, it just feels like they're just kind of up in their little palace, and that's it. Whereas, like, in the book, it really felt like it was just their region, which is, you know, just the elves are described so mystically and magically in the book, and they just feel petty in the movie. And yeah, I'm all for petty elves, but like, I don't know, it just didn't work for me. And then we have Tauriel, who is Legolas's like soon-to-be fiance kind of thing. It's weird because Legolas like wants to marry her, but then like Thranduil like doesn't like her, but then like wants Legolas to marry her anyway. It doesn't make sense. And then you have Tauriel, who then falls in love with one of the dwarves, Keely, and it's so insta-lovey, as in they spend like 2 seconds together. Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, they spend like 2 scenes together, and then like in their 3rd scene they're professing love, and in both of those 2 scenes they just kind of stare at each other. They don't really even have like a good conversation. So what? Like, I mean, I knew the bar was low for any kind of like epic romance, but I mean, come on. The epic romance is between Bilbo and Thorin, y'all. We could have had the best gay relationship, because you watch these movies and tell me that Bilbo and Thorin are not gay for each other, because they are. Honestly, what saves this movie in the back half is Smaug, because they make it to the mountain. I'm just gonna completely skip talking about Lake Town, because Lake Town, like, it was so boring that like I honestly kind of fell asleep a little bit. It's really dumb. Basically, oh my god, what's his name? Luke Evans. Luke Evans, he plays Bard. He's basically just Legolas. except a human. Like in the book, he just kind of pops up and then he's like, hello. And then like, I really enjoyed it. It just kind of feels really random in the book, but it's not like given a whole lot of weight. It's just kind of like, okay, this is happening. But like we get into Bard's family life and the stuff with the master and fucking Alfred. So Alfred is basically just Grima Wormtongue, except not as good. And it's just, like that whole, like all the sequences in Lake Town just felt very unnecessary and didn't need to be here. But that takes us to Smaug, because Smaug is great. Like, you know that you just know that Benedict Cumberbatch had such a great time voicing and doing the motion capture for Smaug, and it really shows. Like it's like a genuinely enjoyable part of the movie, because I think that Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman, they had really good chemistry together, just kind of bouncing off each other in that scene. Like just the voice acting, it was just really good. And so yeah, but then for every good scene, it's like, we have to have a terrible one. And so right after that, we have this stupid chase sequence through the mountain where the dwarves ride around on shields on molten gold and then fill up a massive statue full of gold and then lure the dragon and then break open the mold to like have molten gold fall on him. And it's just really dumb. Like it's like they went through the most elaborate way possible to try to hurt him. Like, you know what it felt like? It felt like I was playing a Lego level. You know, like I played Lego Lord of the Rings when I was a kid, and like, you know, they would take like a small sequence from the movie and then stretch it into a level. And watching that sequence with Smaug felt like a Lego level, and not a good way too. It just was boring and dumb. And then of course Smaug shakes it off, and then we end on a stupid cliffhanger. Stupid because this should have been resolved in 2 movies. It did not need to or have to be 3 movies. And so yeah, I rated Desolation of Smaug a 6 out of 10 because I kind of enjoyed it, some parts of it, but this is really where we start to see just the intense downhill shoot of this trilogy. And that brings us to the Battle of the Five Armies. So the Battle of the Five Armies, I think, is probably the most offensive movie I've ever watched. And by offensive, I mean, I was offended that I was wasting my time. It felt like, I mean, luckily I had a copious amount of alcohol with me, because otherwise I would not have made it through this movie. It was just so bad. And like, I remembered it being bad, but also I was fully unprepared for how bad it actually was. Like, so much of this movie just does not make sense. Like, you watch it and you're watching a scene and it's so poorly constructed that you forget what happened like a minute ago, and they just run through plot points like so fast. Like at the beginning of the movie, we like do a time jump, and then like Thorin is suddenly like mad, like insane with like dragon sickness, and like that's like something that was like kind of in the book, where he just like really wanted the Arkenstone, but they take it and they have it almost be like kind of this like One Ring-esque effect on him, where he gets all like weird and muttery and echoey, and it's just dumb. And I think it ruined Thorin's character for me, honestly, because then literally halfway through the movie, somebody, I think, is just like snap out of it, and then he just kind of does. Like, no motivation for, or like he had no arc. He just like was bad, and then suddenly magically he was okay again. It just make it make sense, because it doesn't. And then also just the action in this movie. And this movie is mostly action. They saw, you know, because in the book, Bilbo gets knocked out and misses the whole battle, which I think is iconic and awesome in J.R.R. Tolkien, because he didn't want to, what did he not want to do? He did not want to romanticize war, because he was in World War I, and, you know, he shows us the after effects of war and how terrible and traumatic war is. as, you know, deep as he can go into that in a children's book, but he doesn't glamorize the fighting. Whereas this movie, all it does is glamorize the fighting. And just how cool the characters are and how many orcs they can kill and heads they can bonk and stuff. And one of the dwarves is riding a pig and literally looks like a video game character because he was not a real person. Like, and that's the thing I think my biggest complaint with like the CGI in this movie is it doesn't feel like there's any weight. You know, because like in movies like the previous Lord of the Rings, you know, you have the Ents, you have the massive elephants, and they feel real because of how much like weight it appears that they have. And even something like Pacific Rim, you have these massive mechs, and they feel like they have weight, and so you're watching it and you're believing it because it like registers in your brain as being like, ooh, like that it looks like it makes sense. Whereas in The Hobbit, people are flying around and shit. Legolas jumps like on falling cobblestones. It does not make sense. And also, this movie is dreadfully boring. Like, it's almost 3 hours of action, and it's boring. I mean, and that was like the worst crime, and there's some stupid subplots and stuff. I don't really want to get into it because it's just, what's the point? But the one thing that I was really annoyed at, can you guess? Because it's fucking Alfred. Alfred comes in this movie and has like a whole ass subplot. And why? This made up character who's really annoying and like sexist, misogynistic, just a piece of shit, honestly. Why is he getting screen time? Why does he get, like, it just, every time he was on screen, I was questioning my decision to subject myself to watching this movie. And like at the end, like he's like trying to cross-dress to pretend to be a woman so he doesn't have to fight. And then he like, you know, has like a sassy moment to Bard when he has like fake tits. And it's supposed to be funny, but it was just really dumb. I don't know. It's just things like this just tank my and that sucks. It's because like the first movie had so much promise and was so full of hope and really good, and even the second movie had like glimmers of it here and there, but then you had just shit start to happen, and then this movie is just the product of that shit. And so that's why I rated it a 2 out of 10. So it's bad, it's awful, and honestly, I think if you do read The Hobbit and are interested in these movies, I recommend you don't. It's just, no. So, on a scale, I haven't made up a scale. Let's make up a scale. So, this scale I think will work for this series. We are going to just evaluate films on, compared to the book. Which is better, and how much? We'll just weigh them like I'm one of the Egyptian gods, and I'm like weighing your heart against a feather, except it's movies and their source material. So we have The Hobbit, we have our book over here, and we have the first one, Unexpected Journey. Okay, is it as good as, better, or worse? And for The Unexpected Journey, I think it's as good as the book. I genuinely like the first film that much, where like it just captures like all the good feeling that I really got from the book. So I liked Unexpected Journey. Now, Desolation of Smaug. It's worse than the book, but it has some good moments, so it's kind of like an in-between. It's not terrible, but it's not good. It's just there. And then we have Battle of the Five Armies, which y'all know is terrible. It's the worst. It's awful. No, I do not recommend or would subject anybody to watching this movie. Sorry that was a very long video, but I had lots of things to say. So I am going to be doing more of these book versus adaptation videos in the future because there are many adaptations out there, and I read a lot and I watch a lot, so this was really fun to do and really fun to talk about, so let me know if you enjoyed it down below, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.